Pre-agricultural humans didn't have access to saturated fat for the most part. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Thought I would chat with you guys and gals about this today. Quick reminder, if you please click like down below, be greatly appreciated. If you're not following or subscribed, please do so. And if you would be kind enough to drop me a comment just to say hello or leave your thoughts, I would appreciate that. Thank you. So let's get over to the topic. Now, when I make this statement, you're going to hear people who scream about the exceptions to the rule, as if anybody they have ever met had an ancestor who actually lived in those regions, right? And I'm saying that last part is hyperbole. Hey, maybe you do know some Samoans, okay? Maybe you do know some Inuits, okay? Fair enough. But for everybody else, for the rest of the world, 99% of you do not have a single ancestor who anywhere before agriculture had more access to more than about 5 grams of saturated fat a day, okay? At the absolute most, and I mean, that's pushing it, guys. And people say, what do you mean, what about me? No. So what are the significant sources of saturated fat found in nature? Well, it's not game animals. So what are we left with? Arctic circle animals. What are we talking about? Whales, seals, walruses, okay? Only in really, really cold climates. And I think it's fair to say the majority of you, even along coastlines, your ancestors were not out hunting whales for 50,000 years. Okay? That's not something that smaller scale, low technology before we had civilizations were really doing for the most part. And they certainly weren't doing it as a staple. So let's set the whales aside. They were eating fish. All right. Okay, all along the coastlines. Fish, normal fish, they weren't out hunting whales every day and feeding the tribe whales for 100,000 years. All right, so what do we have left? Coconuts. Well, we know coconut oil is not even particularly good. So that's what you have, guys. So you had coconuts over in a few tropical regions, right? And you got whales and seals. That's your saturated fat. You're not really finding it anywhere else, not in any significant degree, not in amounts that people would have been able to eat, right? You're just not finding it. So when people make this topic that, well, our ancestors ate this, it's like, what do you think that they were eating? Let's assume that you had some ancestors who were eating large amounts of wild game. Let's say it's a big part of your ancestry, because people act like it's totally natural to eat huge amounts of saturated fat, but it's like it didn't happen. Anyone ever seen the fat profile in wild game? I'm not talking about grass-fed. Step back. People try to act like grass-fed and wild game are even remotely in the same category. No, grass-fed is in the same category with grain-fed, just slightly leaner. Okay? It's still, so if you take the spectrum, let's say wild game, like, a deer or an elk or something like that, versus, say, your grass-fed beef. And then you have the grain-fed beef, grain finished out. You realize the grass-fed is just barely a little bit leaner than the grain-finished. And neither of them are anywhere near. It's like one step lower, whereas in the natural or the wild game is going to be like 5 steps lower. Okay? Because wild animals are not standing in a field munching grass all day. Right? Do we understand this? They don't reach the body weights. They don't reach the size. They're running. They're eating what they can. They're foraging. They're eating way less, and they're moving more. They are dramatically leaner. They're basically bodybuilder lean. Okay? They're shredded. So you're talking about food that we're even like, well, this grass-fed beef, it's only 20% of the calories or 25% are fat. Well, the wild game, it's like 3%. Okay? Understand why people used to talk about the rabbit starvation thing, because it's lean wild game. There's almost no fat. There's not enough fat for you to actually even reach some of your essential fats on. It's too dang lean. Okay? Understand that? Your ancestors aren't getting saturated fat. The same thing with, the milk. And I'm very pro-dairy. Let me be clear now. I believe in taking the fat out, doing more fat-free dairies for the most part. I think it's better overall. I'm very pro-dairy for athletes, lifters. Big on it. Dairy protein's phenomenal. right? Arguably, for me, if I had to pick, and we don't have to, fortunately, I'd go dairy protein over meat any day. If we're talking purely muscle gaining and athletic performance, it's a hair better, right? It's just slightly overall better. But hey, we can do both. All right, but the point, you aren't getting milk. Nobody was getting milk regularly in nature. That's agriculture. Okay, that's agriculture. You have to have the pasture-raised animals. If we're back over to pastures, this is agriculture. And without farming and agriculture, we still don't have enough to feed all of them, right? Because nobody's living on just that. You've got to be able to farm in order to have herds of animals. Like, you have to be able to farm and have agriculture and farms. It doesn't work on its own, okay? So it only works in regions where you're doing that. And interestingly enough, people aren't going to like this. When we go back and look at records, where do we find the first atherosclerosis in humans? When we look at records of remains we find atherosclerosis starting in the herdsmen of goats. We're talking thousands of years ago. So we found records to where it's like, aha, this is where we're finding it. We're not finding it like when they find paleo remains, they're not seeing it. But age 40 bodies of, say, goat herders, because what are they eating? They're getting red meat from that. They're eating pasture-raised meat, and they're drinking the milk and all that. But they're getting that pasture-raised meat because milk itself is actually much easier on your lipid profile than the meat. Interestingly enough, if it's whole, complete dairy, not once you remove it down to butter. Now, if you're going down to butter, absolutely, enormous impact on LDL. Whole milk, not so much, but they're still eating all the meat, and that's where you see the first atherosclerosis appearing. Okay, and we don't have that previously because they just weren't getting that much saturated fat. Like, nobody was eating it. It's unheard of it, and there's no source of it, right? It would be literally like saying, our ancient ancestors over here, they all did tons of cocaine, and you're like, large quantities of cocaine are kind of man-made, without having the cocoa leaf in the press. So I'm using that as hyperbole, but you get the idea. This is man-made. Okay? Let me say that again. Unless you lived in the Arctic Circle or were eating tons of coconuts, but it's definitely animal source saturated fat, this is a man-made phenomenon. This doesn't occur in regions where our ancestors lived for the most part. It's not natural. We created it. So quit calling it caveman and whatever else people do. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.